Rashid Al-Zahra controlled oil pipelines worth billions, commanded boardrooms in 3 continents, and had never met a problem money couldn't solve. But when his 8-year-old daughter Nadia stopped reading, stopped learning, and retreated into a world no expensive specialist could penetrate, he was about to discover that some battles require weapons he'd never learned to wield. Enter Amara, a soft-spoken woman from Kenya with calloused hands, a weathered teaching certificate, and secrets buried deeper than his surveillance system could detect. What his hidden cameras would capture over the next 3 weeks would not only transform his daughter's mind, but shatter everything he thought he knew about strength, trust, and the price of control. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rashid Al-Zahra's penthouse office on the 47th floor of the Burj Al-Noor in Qatar's financial district commanded a view that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the desert horizon. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a kingdom he had built from nothing. Petroleum refineries dotting the coastline like metal flowers, luxury hotels bearing his family's crest, and a shipping empire that moved 1/4 of the region's crude oil to markets in Asia and Europe. At 42, Rashid had earned his reputation as the architect, not for buildings, but for deals. He restructured failing energy companies the way others arranged furniture, turning debt into profit with surgical precision. His competitors respected him. His employees feared him. World leaders took his calls within minutes. But success had come with sacrifices carved in marble and measured in missed moments. His wife, Layla, had been the gentle counterbalance to his relentless ambition. A literature professor at Qatar University, she spoke 4 languages and could quote Persian poetry from memory. While Rashid conquered markets, Layla cultivated minds, including their daughter Nadia's, who by age 6 was reading chapter books in both Arabic and English, solving puzzles that challenged children twice her age. Then came the diagnosis that wealth couldn't cure: multiple sclerosis, aggressive and unforgiving. Layla fought for 18 months with the same quiet determination she brought to everything, but the disease was stronger than love, stronger than medicine, stronger than Rashid's desperate attempts to buy more time with the world's best specialists. She died on a Tuesday morning in spring, leaving behind a daughter who had watched her brilliant mother fade, and a husband who suddenly discovered that all his power meant nothing against the silence that filled their Doha mansion. 8-year-old Nadia had inherited her mother's sharp mind and gentle spirit. Before the illness, she would spend hours in Layla's study, surrounded by towering bookshelves, absorbing stories like sunlight. She wrote her own tales about desert princesses and talking camels, illustrating them with careful colored pencils. Teachers called her gifted. Layla called her magical. After the funeral, the magic disappeared. Nadia stopped reading entirely. The books that once captivated her gathered dust. When Rashid hired private tutors, distinguished educators from London, Paris, and Cairo, she would sit motionless at her desk, staring past them as if they were speaking underwater. Numbers meant nothing. Letters became foreign symbols. The child who once devoured knowledge now rejected it completely. Selective learning regression due to traumatic grief, explained Dr. Helena Moss, a renowned child psychologist from Switzerland, whom Rashid flew in at considerable expense. Combined with possible autism spectrum characteristics that were previously masked by her high intelligence. The trauma may have stripped away her coping mechanisms. Rashid listened from behind his mahogany desk, fingers drumming against the leather surface. What does that mean in terms of solutions? Time, patience, and specialized intervention. I recommend residential treatment in Geneva. Our facility has... No. The word came out harder than Rashid intended. She stays home. Find another way. Dr. Moss adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. Al-Zahra, with respect, your daughter needs more than what traditional tutoring can provide. This isn't about intelligence anymore. It's about connection. Connection. The word stuck in Rashid's throat like sand. When had he last truly connected with anyone? His days blurred between conference calls and contract negotiations. Even before Layla's illness, he had delegated much of Nadia's care to nannies and tutors, telling himself he was building a legacy for her future while missing her present entirely. Now, watching his daughter withdraw further each day, he felt the weight of that distance like stones in his chest. The Al-Zahra mansion sat on 12 acres of manicured grounds in West Bay, a fortress of glass and limestone that Architectural Digest had featured on its cover. But inside its pristine halls, silence reigned. Nadia moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding the study where she once laughed with her mother, ignoring the piano where Layla used to play evening melodies. Rashid tried everything money could buy. He converted the mansion's east wing into a learning center complete with interactive whiteboards, sensory tools, and adaptive technology. He hired occupational therapists, speech specialists, and educational consultants. Each expert arrived with credentials and confidence, only to leave weeks later with polite excuses about complex cases and alternative approaches. The breaking point came during a session with Dr. Ahmad Qureshi, a child development specialist from Dubai with 30 years of experience. Nadia sat at the custom-built learning table, a worksheet of simple addition problems in front of her. Dr. Qureshi spoke gently, encouragingly, but she didn't respond. She didn't even acknowledge his presence. Then, without warning, she stood up and walked to the window. She pressed her palm against the glass and began humming, a low, haunting melody that Rashid recognized as one of Layla's favorite songs. But there were no words, just the wordless tune floating through the air like a prayer. Dr. Qureshi tried to redirect her attention. "Nadia, let's try something different. Maybe we could—" She screamed, not in anger or frustration, but in a sound so raw and desperate that it seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her 8-year-old throat. The worksheet fluttered to the floor. Dr. Qureshi stepped back, startled. Rashid, who had been observing from the doorway, moved forward instinctively. But when he reached for his daughter, she flinched away from his touch and ran from the room, leaving behind only the echo of that terrible cry. That night, Rashid stood in his home office, surrounded by monitors displaying security feeds from throughout the mansion. It was a habit born from years of corporate paranoia, but lately it had become something else, a way to watch over the daughter he couldn't seem to reach. On one screen, he could see Nadia in her bedroom, sitting cross-legged on her carpet, arranging colored blocks in complex patterns that seemed to follow some logic only she understood. She worked with intense focus, occasionally stopping to rock slightly back and forth, humming fragments of her mother's songs. The surveillance system had been installed for security, but now it felt like the only way he could truly observe his daughter without his presence changing her behavior. Through the cameras, he saw glimpses of the child he was losing, moments of curiosity, creativity, and connection that disappeared the moment another adult entered her world. It was his assistant, Fatima al-Rashid, who brought him the application that would change everything. She knocked on his office door late one evening, carrying a folder that looked thin compared to the thick portfolios of previous candidates. "Sir, I know you said no more tutors, but this one is different." Rashid looked up from his laptop, exhaustion weighing on his shoulders like a heavy coat. "Different how? She's not from an agency. She responded to a posting on an international education forum. Her background is unconventional." Rashid accepted the folder skeptically. Inside was a simple resume printed on plain paper. Amara, 34 years old, from Nairobi, Kenya. Bachelor's degree in elementary education from Kenyatta University. 7 years teaching in rural schools, 2 years working with special needs children in refugee camps, no fancy credentials, no prestigious institutions, no glowing recommendations from wealthy families. But there was something else, a handwritten letter 3 pages long, written in careful English script. "Dear Mr. Al-Zahra," it began, "I have read about your daughter's situation through mutual contacts in the education community. I am not writing to offer you miracle cures or revolutionary methods. I cannot promise that your daughter will return to who she was before tragedy changed her world. But I can offer something that perhaps she needs more than expertise, the patience to meet her exactly where she is, without judgment, without expectations, and without the pressure to be anyone other than who she chooses to be in this moment." The letter went on to describe her philosophy of education, not as a process of filling empty vessels with knowledge, but as a conversation between two complete human beings, each with something valuable to offer the other. She wrote about children she had worked with in Nairobi's informal settlements, kids who had experienced trauma and loss that would break most adults, yet who still possessed an innate hunger to understand their world. "Sometimes," the letter concluded, "the most profound learning happens not when we try to fix what seems broken, but when we create space for healing to unfold at its own pace. If you believe your daughter might benefit from this approach, I would be honored to spend time with her. If not, I understand completely, and I wish your family peace on whatever path you choose." At the bottom of the page was a phone number and a simple signature, "With respect and hope, Amara." Rashid read the letter twice, then set it aside and returned to his laptop. But something about those words lingered in his mind like smoke. The next morning, he read it again, then again that afternoon. By evening, he was reaching for his phone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The video call connected. At exactly 9 p.m. Qatar time, which Amara had calculated would be 6 p.m. in Nairobi. Rashid sat in his home office, the city lights of Doha twinkling behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His laptop screen filled with the image of a woman sitting in what appeared to be a modest apartment, a single lamp providing warm lighting that softened her features. Amara Kiptu looked exactly as he had imagined from her letter, composed but not stiff, professional yet approachable. She wore a simple blue blouse, her hair pulled back neatly, and when she smiled, it reached her eyes in a way that reminded him unexpectedly of Layla. "Mr. Al-Zahra, thank you for taking the time to speak with me," she said, her English clear and measured, with the musical cadence of Swahili underneath. "I'll be direct, Ms. Kiptu. Your letter was different, but I need to understand what you're actually proposing. My daughter has been through dozens of specialists." Amara nodded slowly. "May I ask you something first? When was the last time someone spent time with Nadia without trying to teach her anything?" The question caught Rashid off guard. He found himself thinking back through the parade of tutors, therapists, and specialists. Each had arrived with agendas, lesson plans, assessment, tools. Even his own interactions with Nadia had become focused on encouraging her to eat more, speak more, engage more. I'm not sure I understand. Sometimes, Mr. Al-Zahra, children who have experienced profound loss need permission to simply exist without performance. In my experience working with refugee children, those who had lost parents, homes, everything familiar, they often needed space to grieve before they could learn again. Rashid leaned back in his chair. "You're suggesting my daughter is still grieving. I'm suggesting that perhaps the pressure to return to who she was before is preventing her from discovering who she's becoming now." For the next hour, they talked about Amara's unconventional methods. She described her work in Kakuma refugee camp, where traditional educational approaches had failed with traumatized children. Instead of structured lessons, she had created what she called learning gardens, spaces where children could explore, create and connect at their own pace. "I worked with a boy named Daniel," she said, her voice taking on a storytelling quality. 7 years old, hadn't spoken since watching his village burn. The aid workers wanted me to focus on language therapy, but I noticed he was fascinated by shadows, so I started bringing objects to cast shadows with sticks, stones, pieces of fabric. For weeks, we just made shadow pictures together. No words, no pressure. Then one day he pointed to a shadow and whispered, "Bird." It was the first word he'd spoken in 8 months. Rashid found himself drawn into her narrative, imagining his own daughter discovering words through shadows instead of worksheets. "What would you actually do with Nadia?" he asked. "I would observe her first, learn her rhythms, her interests, what brings her comfort. Then I would meet her there in her world and see if she might be willing to let me walk alongside her for a while. And if she refuses, if she reacts the way she has to everyone else." Amara was quiet for a moment. "Then I would respect her refusal and continue to be present until she decided otherwise. Some children need to test whether adults will abandon them when things become difficult. Consistency in the face of rejection can be its own form of teaching." After the call ended, Rashid sat in the darkness of his office, mulling over her words. Everything about Amara contradicted the approach every expert had recommended. Where others promised measurable outcomes and structured progress, she offered patience and presence. Where others brought credentials and techniques, she brought intuition and time. It was either exactly what Nadia needed or the biggest waste of money he'd ever considered. 3 days later, Rashid made the call that would bring Amara to Qatar. The logistics were complex: work visa, accommodations, travel arrangements, but his assistant handled everything with the efficiency that kept his business empire running smoothly. Within a week, Amara Kiptu was on a plane to Doha. He met her at Hamad International Airport himself, something he hadn't done for any of the previous specialists. As she emerged from customs with a single suitcase and a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, he was struck by how small she seemed in the vast terminal, yet how purposefully she moved through the crowd. "Ms. Kiptu, welcome to Qatar." "Thank you, Mr. Al-Zahra. I'm grateful for this opportunity." During the drive to the mansion, Amara gazed out at the city's skyline with genuine curiosity, asking questions about the architecture, the culture, the blend of tradition and modernity that defined modern Doha. Her questions weren't polite small talk, but reflected real interest in understanding the world Nadia inhabited. "Tell me about your daughter's daily routine," she said, as they wound through the wealthy suburbs of West Bay. "She wakes around 8, has breakfast alone in her room. She won't eat with the staff or me anymore. Then she usually goes to the garden or her playroom. No structured activities. She just exists." "What does she like to do in the garden?" Rashid realized he didn't actually know. He saw her through the security cameras, sitting by the fountain or walking among the date palms, but he had stopped joining her there after too many attempts at conversation were met with silence. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "That's okay. We'll discover it together." The mansion's gates swung open to reveal the limestone facade and geometric gardens that had taken 2 years to design. Amara said nothing about the obvious wealth on display, but Rashid noticed her attention lingering on the date palm grove and the traditional Arabic fountain at the center of the circular drive. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "Nadia is lucky to have so much space to explore." Inside, Rashid led her through the marble foyer, past the grand staircase and into the family wing where Nadia spent most of her time. The converted learning center stood empty, its interactive displays and carefully arranged educational materials looking suddenly sterile under the afternoon light. "This is where the tutoring sessions usually happen," Rashid explained. Amara stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the large room. She walked to the windows that faced the garden, then turned back to survey the space. Would it be possible for me to spend time with Nadia in other places? Her bedroom, the garden, wherever she feels most comfortable? Of course. I just thought, shouldn't there be some structure? Structure will come when she's ready to create it herself. That evening, Rashid showed Amara to the guest suite in the West Wing, a spacious apartment with its own entrance, living area, and view of the garden. As she settled in, he found himself nervous in a way that reminded him of his first major business presentation 20 years ago. When would you like to meet Nadia? He asked. Tomorrow, naturally, but not as a formal introduction. Perhaps I could simply be present in spaces where she might encounter me. Let her observe me before I observe her. Rashid nodded, though the concept felt foreign to him. In business, meetings had agendas, objectives, measurable outcomes. This felt like stepping into fog. The next morning, Amara positioned herself in the garden with a book and a cup of tea, sitting on a stone bench near the fountain where the security cameras had often captured Nadia. She didn't look toward a house or make any attempt to attract attention. She simply read, occasionally pausing to watch the koi fish swimming in the fountain's pool. From his office, Rashid monitored the feeds obsessively. At 10:47 a.m., Nadia appeared at the French doors, leading to the garden. She stood there for several minutes, clearly aware of the stranger's presence. Then, instead of retreating as she had done with previous tutors, she stepped outside. She didn't approach Amara directly. Instead, she began her usual circuit of the garden, but Rashid noticed subtle differences in her movements. She lingered, longer at certain spots, seemed more aware of her surroundings, occasionally glanced toward the bench where Amara sat reading. After 20 minutes, Nadia positioned herself about 10 feet from Amara, settling cross-legged on the grass near a cluster of jasmine bushes. She began arranging small stones in patterns, something she often did, but today she worked with more deliberate focus. Amara never looked directly at her, but Rashid could see from the angle of her shoulders that she was aware of Nadia's presence. When a gentle breeze scattered some of Nadia's carefully arranged stones, Amara quietly picked up a few that had rolled toward her feet and placed them back within Nadia's reach. No words were exchanged, no eye contact was made, but something passed between them, a moment of acknowledgement that felt more significant than any of the forced interactions with previous specialists. That afternoon, the same quiet dance repeated itself. Amara found different spots around the garden, sometimes reading under the date palms, other times sketching the fountain, once simply sitting with her eyes closed, face turned toward the sun. And wherever she was, Nadia eventually appeared nearby, never approaching directly, but creating a careful orbit around this new presence in her world. On the third day, something shifted. Amara had brought a small wooden flute and was playing soft, meandering melodies that drifted across the garden like smoke. Nadia, who had been arranging colored glass marbles on a flat stone, stopped what she was doing and tilted her head to listen. The music wasn't complex, simple, repetitive phrases that seemed to echo the rhythm of breathing or heartbeat. After a few minutes, Nadia began humming along, not the melody Amara was playing, but a harmony that wove around it perfectly. Rashid, watching from his office, felt his breath catch. It was the first time in months that he had heard Nadia engage musically with another person. The breakthrough came on the 5th day, though it wasn't what anyone might have expected. Amara was sitting by the fountain, writing in a journal, when Nadia approached closer than she ever had before. Without speaking, she placed a single white jasmine flower on the bench beside Amara's book. Amara looked at the flower, then at Nadia, and smiled with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's beautiful." Nadia didn't respond verbally, but she didn't retreat either. Instead, she sat down on the ground nearby and continued her stone arrangements, this time incorporating small twigs and leaves to create more elaborate patterns. For the next hour, they worked in companionable silence, Amara writing, Nadia creating, both existing peacefully in the same space without demands or expectations. That evening, as Rashid reviewed the day's footage, he realized something profound had occurred. For the first time since Layla's death, his daughter had chosen to connect with another human being, not because she was coerced or encouraged, but because she had found someone willing to meet her exactly where she was. It wasn't traditional education, and it certainly wasn't what he had paid for with any of the previous specialists. But watching his daughter's face as she worked alongside Amara, Rashid saw something he had feared was lost forever: the possibility of peace. The real work, he sensed, was just beginning. The first sign that Amara was unlike any educator Rashid had ever encountered came on a Tuesday morning when she asked him for the strangest request he'd received in years. "I need dirt," she said simply, standing in his office doorway with the same calm confidence she brought to everything. "Rich soil, not the decorative sand in your garden beds, and some clay if you can find it." Rashid looked up from his laptop, where he'd been reviewing quarterly projections for his European operations. "I'm sorry, what?" "For Nadia. I've been observing her patterns for a week now, and I believe she learns through her hands more than her eyes or ears. But the learning materials in your education center are all plastic and metal. She needs earth." "Earth," Rashid repeated slowly. "Yes, and some basic tools. Nothing sharp, just wooden spoons, maybe some bamboo sticks. Oh, and if you have any large, shallow containers, that would be helpful too." An hour later, Rashid found himself instructing his groundskeeper to prepare buckets of the richest soil from the property's composting area, feeling absurd, but somehow trusting this woman who had accomplished more with his daughter in 5 days than anyone else had in 8 months. The transformation in their interactions began immediately. Instead of sitting separately in the garden, Amara and Nadia now worked side by side at a low table she had positioned under the largest date palm. Amara would demonstrate simple techniques, rolling clay into shapes, pressing patterns into soft earth with sticks and stones, while Nadia watched with an intensity that reminded Rashid of how she used to focus on her mother's bedtime stories. Within 3 days, Nadia was creating elaborate sculptures from the clay-earth mixture, not random shapes, but intricate forms that seemed to follow some internal logic. Rashid found himself studying them through the security feeds, trying to decode what they might represent. Some resembled buildings, others looked like abstract landscapes, and a few appeared to be human figures, though stylized in ways that suggested deep emotion rather than realistic representation. "What is she making?" he asked Amara during one of their brief evening check-ins. "Stories," Amara replied. "She's telling me about her world through her hands. This one," she gestured to a curved tower-like sculpture with intricate patterns carved into its surface, "she made while humming one of your wife's songs. I think it might represent a memory of feeling safe." Rashid stared at the sculpture, seeing it with new eyes. The patterns weren't random decorations. They looked like the arabesque designs that had adorned Layla's favorite scarf, the one she wore when reading to Nadia in the evenings. But it was what happened the following week that truly astounded him. Amara had introduced water to their daily sessions, filling shallow pans and allowing Nadia to mix different consistencies of mud and clay. What started as sensory play evolved into something far more sophisticated. Nadia began creating entire miniature worlds, complete landscapes with hills, valleys, rivers and structures that showed an understanding of engineering principles that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old. "She's building the refugee camp where I worked," Amara told him one evening, pointing to a detailed model Nadia had constructed. "I mentioned it briefly while we were working, described the layout of the buildings, the central well, the school tent." She absorbed every detail and recreated it perfectly. Rashid examined the miniature settlement, marveling at its accuracy and complexity. How is that possible? She hasn't shown this kind of focus or retention with anything else. Because this time she chose to learn. She wasn't being taught, she was discovering. There's a profound difference. The breakthrough came during the third week, and it happened in a way that nearly gave Rashid a heart attack. He was in his office during a video conference with executives in Singapore when movement on one of his security monitors caught his eye. Nadia was standing at the edge of the property's fountain pool, which was nearly 3 feet deep. She had never shown interest in the water before, always maintaining a careful distance from it. But now she was leaning forward, reaching toward something floating on the surface. One of her clay sculptures had apparently been placed in the water and was slowly dissolving, its careful patterns washing away in the current created by the fountain jets. Rashid muted his microphone, heart racing. Where was Amara? He quickly switched to other camera feeds, scanning the garden. There, she was 30 feet away, sitting calmly under the jasmine arbor, clearly visible to Nadia, but making no move to intervene. As Rashid watched in horror, Nadia leaned further over the water, trying to retrieve her dissolving sculpture. Her feet slipped on the wet stone edge, and for a terrifying moment it looked like she might fall in. Rashid was halfway out of his chair, ready to sprint to the garden, when something extraordinary happened. Instead of falling, Nadia caught herself, stepped back from the pool's edge and began to laugh. Not the polite social laughter he remembered from before her mother's death, but deep, genuine giggles that seemed to bubble up from some place inside her that had been locked away for months. She was laughing at the sight of her sculpture dissolving, watching the clay forms break apart and swirl in the water like abstract art in motion. Amara rose from her bench and walked over, not with urgency or concern, but with the easy stride of someone who had been expecting this exact scenario. Sometimes the most beautiful art is the kind that doesn't last forever, she said, her voice carrying clearly to the security microphones. What do you think it looked like as it changed? Nadia pointed to the swirling patterns in the water, her face animated in a way Rashid hadn't seen since before Layla's illness. She began describing what she saw, not in full sentences, but in excited fragments that Amara seemed to understand perfectly. Clouds, Nadia said, pointing to one dissolving. Clay formation, yes, I see that too. What else? Mama's hands when she... Nadia's voice trailed off, but she continued gesturing, showing with her own small hands the graceful movements her mother used to make while painting watercolors. Rashid sat back down heavily, his Singapore colleagues forgotten. His daughter was not only speaking in longer phrases than she had in months, she was making connections between abstract visual patterns and emotional memories. She was thinking metaphorically again. That evening, Rashid cornered Amara in the garden as she was cleaning up their workspace. That was incredibly dangerous, he said, trying to keep his voice level. She could have fallen into the fountain. Amara looked up from the clay tools she was washing in a bucket of clean water. But she didn't. You couldn't have known that. What if she had? Then I would have been there to help her. But I've been watching Nadia for 3 weeks now, Mr. Al-Zahra. She's extremely careful around water, almost fearfully so. She needed to approach it on her own terms, test her own boundaries. If I had rushed over the moment she got close to the edge, I would have confirmed her fear instead of allowing her to overcome it. Rashid paced across the stone pathway, his business-trained mind struggling with the concept of calculated risk applied to his daughter's safety. How could you be so certain? I wasn't certain of the outcome. I was certain of my ability to respond if needed. There's a difference. And if I hadn't been monitoring the cameras, what if something had happened and I blamed you? Amara was quiet for a long moment, her hands still moving methodically as she cleaned the tools. Would you rather have a daughter who never takes risks because adults are too afraid to let her try, or a daughter who learns to trust her own capabilities? The question hit him like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly what he had been doing for months? Wrapping Nadia in layers of protection that had become suffocation, hiring specialists to fix her instead of allowing her to heal herself. But there was something else bothering him, something he couldn't quite articulate. The surveillance footage from that afternoon showed Amara maintaining visual contact with Nadia throughout the entire incident. She had positioned herself with a clear line of sight to the fountain, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to give Nadia autonomy. It was almost as if she had planned the entire scenario. "Did you put that sculpture in the water?" he asked suddenly. Amara's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their cleaning motions. "Nadia placed it there herself." "That's not what I asked." She looked up at him directly, her dark eyes unreadable in the gathering twilight. "I suggested that clay changes when it meets water. I mentioned that some artists create works specifically intended to be temporary, beautiful precisely because they don't last. May have wondered aloud what would happen if one of her sculptures encountered the fountain. So you manipulated her into taking that risk. I gave her information and let her make her own choices about what to do with it. That's called education, Mr. Al-Zahra." Rashid felt his frustration building. Everything about Amara's methods challenged his need for control, his instinct to protect, his desire for predictable outcomes. Yet he couldn't argue with the results. In 3 weeks, she had awakened parts of his daughter that months of traditional therapy had failed to reach. "I need to understand your methods better," he said finally. "I want detailed reports of your daily activities, your goals, your assessment of Nadia's progress." "No!" The single word hung in the air between them like a challenge. "I'm sorry?" "Reports and assessments will change how I work with her. The moment I start measuring Nadia's progress against external expectations, I stop seeing her as she actually is. She'll sense that shift, and we'll lose the trust we've built. You're paying me to help your daughter, not to justify my methods to your anxiety." Rashid felt his temper flare, the same hot anger that had served him well in boardroom negotiations. But before he could respond, Amara continued in the same calm tone. "I understand your need to monitor and control, Mr. Al-Zahra. It served you well in business, but Nadia isn't a quarterly report or a merger deal. She's a human being learning to trust the world again after it betrayed her in the most fundamental way possible. That process can't be measured in spreadsheets." "Then how do I know you're actually helping her?" Amara gestured toward the house, where warm light spilled from the windows into the gathering dusk. "Listen." From somewhere inside came the sound Rashid had heard earlier, but hadn't fully processed. Nadia was humming while she helped the kitchen staff prepare dinner, something she hadn't done since before Layla's death. "She's choosing to engage with the world again," Amara said softly. "Not because anyone is forcing her to, but because she's rediscovering that engagement can bring joy instead of only pain. That's not something you can quantify, but it's everything." As Rashid stood in his garden, listening to his daughter's voice drift through the evening air, he realized that Amara was forcing him to confront something he had been avoiding for months. The possibility that his need to understand and control might be the very thing preventing Nadia's healing. But accepting that meant surrendering to uncertainty in a way that went against every instinct that had made him successful. The question was whether he trusted Amara enough to take that leap of faith, or whether his surveillance system would reveal something that would make that trust impossible to maintain. The first time Rashid noticed Amara's nighttime activities, he almost dismissed it as a glitch in the surveillance system. It was 2:17 a.m. when motion sensors triggered an alert on his phone, displaying a feed from the garden's eastern perimeter. A shadowy figure moved between the date palms, carrying what appeared to be a lantern. Rashid sat up in bed, squinting at the small screen. The figure was clearly Amara, dressed in dark clothes, moving with purpose through the garden. She paused at various locations, the fountain, the jasmine arbor, the clay workspace, but from this distance and in the dim lighting, he couldn't determine what she was doing. By the time he had pulled up additional camera angles on his laptop, she had disappeared back into the guest wing. The entire excursion had lasted less than 15 minutes, and in the morning, nothing in the garden appeared disturbed or changed. Rashid told himself it was nothing. Perhaps she couldn't sleep and had gone for a walk. Perhaps she was checking on something from their afternoon session. Perhaps the timestamp was wrong, but when it happened again, 3 nights later, and then again the following week, his business instincts began to override his rational explanations. On the 4th occurrence, Rashid was ready. He had positioned himself in his office with multiple monitor feeds queued up, night vision cameras activated, and audio recording enabled. When the motion alert chimed at 1:43 a.m., he was watching. This time, Amara's nocturnal journey was different. She carried a small bag and what looked like a notebook. She moved directly to the area where she and Nadia worked during the day, but instead of the casual wandering of previous nights, she began a systematic examination of something. Rashid switched to the closest camera angle and enhanced the zoom. Amara was photographing Nadia's clay sculptures with a small digital camera, taking shots from multiple angles, sometimes adjusting the positioning slightly. She made notes in her notebook between photos, her pen moving rapidly across the pages. Then she did something that made Rashid's blood run cold. She carefully collected several small clay pieces, fragments that had broken off during the day's work, and placed them in labeled plastic bags, like evidence, like samples being prepared for analysis. The surveillance footage showed her doing this methodically, professionally, as if she had done it many times before. When she finished, she restored everything to its original position, with such precision that even knowing what to look for, Rashid couldn't detect any disturbance in the morning feeds. But the most disturbing moment came as she prepared to leave. Amara looked directly up at the camera that was recording her, held eye contact for several seconds, and nodded once. Not the casual acknowledgement of someone who had noticed a security device, but the deliberate communication of someone who wanted to be seen. Rashid barely slept for the remainder of the night, his mind spinning through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. Was Amara conducting some kind of research on Nadia without his knowledge? Were the clay samples being sent somewhere for analysis? What was in those photographs, and who might be seeing them? By morning he had made a decision that would fundamentally alter their relationship. "I need to speak with you," he told Amara when she arrived for the day's session. His tone was sharp enough that she immediately set down her bag and gave him her full attention. "Of course. Is something wrong?" "That depends on how you answer my questions. I know about your nighttime activities." Amara's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a slight stiffening that confirmed she knew exactly what he meant. "What would you like to know?" "I want to know why you're photographing my daughter's work in secret. I want to know what you're doing with those clay samples, and I want to know who you're reporting to." For a long moment, Amara said nothing. She glanced toward the house, where Nadia could be seen through the kitchen window, helping the cook arrange. Flowers in a vase, another small miracle of engagement that had emerged over the past month. "May I show you something?" she asked finally. Without waiting for his answer, she retrieved her notebook from her bag and handed it to him. The pages were covered with detailed observations written in her careful script, but not the kind of clinical notes he had expected. Instead, they read like poetry mixed with science. Day 18. N created 3 structures today, each incorporating water channels. The largest resembles the courtyard of a mosque, complete with ablution fountains. When asked about it, she said, "It was a place where sad people come to wash their hearts clean. She's processing grief through architecture." Then I would have been there to help her. But I've been watching Nadia for 3 weeks now, Mr. Al-Zahra. She's extremely careful around water, almost fearfully so. She needed to approach it on her own terms, test her own boundaries. If I had rushed over the moment she got close to the edge, I would have confirmed her fear instead of allowing her to overcome it. Rashid paced across the stone pathway, his business-trained mind struggling with the concept of calculated risk applied to his daughter's safety. "How could you be so certain?" "I wasn't certain of the outcome. I was certain of my ability to respond if needed. There's a difference. And if I hadn't been monitoring the cameras, what if something had happened and I blamed you?" Amara was quiet for a long moment, her hands still moving methodically as she cleaned the tools. "Would you rather have a daughter who never takes risks because adults are too afraid to let her try, or a daughter who learns to trust her own capabilities?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly what he had been doing for months? Wrapping Nadia in layers of protection that had become suffocation, hiring specialists to fix her instead of allowing her to heal herself. But there was something else bothering him, something he couldn't quite articulate. The surveillance footage from that afternoon showed Amara maintaining visual contact with Nadia throughout the entire incident. She had positioned herself with a clear line of sight to the fountain, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to give Nadia autonomy. It was almost as if she had planned the entire scenario. "Did you put that sculpture in the water?" he asked suddenly. Amara's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their cleaning motions. "Nadia placed it there herself." "That's not what I asked." She looked up at him directly, her dark eyes unreadable in the gathering twilight. "I suggested that clay changes when it meets water. I mentioned that some artists create works specifically intended to be temporary, beautiful, precisely because they don't last." He may have wondered aloud what would happen if one of her sculptures encountered the fountain. "So you manipulated her into taking that risk. I gave her information and let her make her own choices about what to do with it. That's called education, Mr. Al-Zahra." Rashid felt his frustration building. Everything about Amara's methods challenged his need for control, his instinct to protect, his desire for predictable outcomes. Yet he couldn't argue with the results. In 3 weeks, she had awakened parts of his daughter that months of traditional therapy had failed to reach. "I need to understand your methods better," he said finally. "I want detailed reports of your daily activities, your goals, your assessment of Nadia's progress." "No." The single word hung in the air between them like a challenge. "I'm sorry?" "Reports and assessments will change how I work with her. The moment I start measuring Nadia's progress against external expectations, I stop seeing her as she actually is. She'll sense that shift, and we'll lose the trust we've built. You're paying me to help your daughter, not to justify my methods to your anxiety." Rashid felt his temper flare, the same hot anger that had served him well in boardroom negotiations, but before he could respond, Amara continued in the same calm tone. "I understand your need to monitor and control, Mr. Al-Zahra. It served you well in business, but Nadia isn't a quarterly report or a merger deal. She's a human being learning to trust the world again after it betrayed her in the most fundamental way possible. That process can't be measured in spreadsheets. Then how do I know you're actually helping her?" Amara gestured toward the house, where warm light spilled from the windows into the gathering dusk. "Listen." From somewhere inside came the sound Rashid had heard earlier but hadn't fully processed. Nadia was humming while she helped the kitchen staff prepare dinner, something she hadn't done since before Layla's death. "She's choosing to engage with the world again," Amara said softly. Not because anyone is forcing her to, but because she's rediscovering that engagement can bring joy instead of only pain. That's not something you can quantify, but it's everything. As Rashid stood in his garden, listening to his daughter's voice drift through the evening air, he realized that Amara was forcing him to confront something he had been avoiding for months. The possibility that his need to understand and control might be the very thing preventing Nadia's healing. But accepting that meant surrendering to uncertainty in a way that went against every instinct that had made him successful. The question was whether he trusted Amara enough to take that leap of faith, or whether his surveillance system would reveal something that would make that trust impossible to maintain. The first time Rashid noticed Amara's nighttime activities, he almost dismissed it as a glitch in the surveillance system. It was 2:17 a.m. when motion sensors triggered an alert on his phone, displaying a feed from the garden's eastern perimeter. A shadowy figure moved between the date palms, carrying what appeared to be a lantern. Rashid sat up in bed, squinting at the small screen. The figure was clearly Amara, dressed in dark clothes, moving with purpose through the garden. She paused at various locations, the fountain, the jasmine arbor, the clay workspace. But from this distance and in the dim lighting, he couldn't determine what she was doing. By the time he had pulled up additional camera angles on his laptop, she had disappeared back into the guest wing. The entire excursion had lasted less than 15 minutes, and in the morning, nothing in the garden appeared disturbed or changed. Rashid told himself it was nothing. Perhaps she couldn't sleep and had gone for a walk. Perhaps she was checking on something from their afternoon session. Perhaps the timestamp was wrong, but when it happened again 3 nights later, and then again the following week, his business instincts began to override his rational explanations. On the 4th occurrence, Rashid was ready. He had positioned himself in his office with multiple monitor feeds queued up, night vision cameras activated, and audio recording enabled. When the motion alert chimed at 1:43 a.m., he was watching. This time, Amara's nocturnal journey was different. She carried a small bag and what looked like a notebook. She moved directly to the area where she and Nadia worked during the day, but instead of the casual wandering of previous nights, she began a systematic examination of something. Rashid switched to the closest camera angle and enhanced the zoom. Amara was photographing Nadia's clay sculptures with a small digital camera, taking shots from multiple angles, sometimes adjusting the positioning slightly. She made notes in her notebook between photos, her pen moving rapidly across the pages. Then she did something that made Rashid's blood run cold. She carefully collected several small clay pieces, fragments that had broken off during the day's work, and placed them in labeled plastic bags, like evidence, like samples being prepared for analysis. The surveillance footage showed her doing this methodically, professionally, as if she had done it many times before. When she finished, she restored everything to its original position with such precision that even knowing what to look for, Rashid couldn't detect any disturbance in the morning feeds. But the most disturbing moment came as she prepared to leave. Amara looked directly up at the camera that was recording her, held eye contact for several seconds, and nodded once. Not the casual acknowledgement of someone who had noticed a security device, but the deliberate communication of someone who wanted to be seen. Rashid barely slept for the remainder of the night, his mind spinning through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. Was Amara conducting some kind of research on Nadia without his knowledge? Were the clay samples being sent somewhere for analysis? What was in those photographs, and who might be seeing them? By morning, he had made a decision that would fundamentally alter their relationship. "I need to speak with you," he told Amara when she arrived for the day's session. His tone was sharp enough that she immediately set down her bag and gave him her full attention. "Of course. Is something wrong? That depends on how you answer my questions. I know about your nighttime activities. Amara's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a slight stiffening that confirmed she knew exactly what he meant. "What would you like to know?" "I want to know why you're photographing my daughter's work in secret. I want to know what you're doing with those clay samples, and I want to know who you're reporting to." For a long moment, Amara said nothing. She glanced toward the house, where Nadia could be seen through the kitchen window, helping the cook arrange. Flowers in a vase, another small miracle of engagement that had emerged over the past month. "May I show you something?" she asked finally. Without waiting for his answer, she retrieved her notebook from her bag and handed it to him. The pages were covered with detailed observations written in her careful script, but not the kind of clinical notes he had expected. Instead, they read like poetry, mixed with science. Day 18, and created 3 structures today, each incorporating water channels. The largest resembles the courtyard of a mosque, complete with ablution fountains. When asked about it, she said, "It was a place where sad people come to wash their hearts clean." She's processing grief through architecture. Day 22, N spent 40 minutes creating what she called worry birds, small clay figures with wings positioned as if about to take flight. She buried them in the soft earth, then dug them up and reshaped them with flowers pressed into the clay. Transformation metaphor emerging, death and rebirth themes consistent with loss processing. Day 25, breakthrough in symbolic representation. N created a clay figure of a woman with arms outstretched, surrounded by smaller figures reaching toward her. When the sculpture was complete, she whispered, "Mama's hugs go everywhere." She's beginning to externalize love as something that persists beyond physical presence. Rashid read page after page of similar observations, each entry revealing layers of his daughter's internal world that he had never suspected existed. The notes weren't clinical or detached. They were filled with wonder at the complexity of a child's mind working through trauma. "The photographs are for my own reference," Amara explained as he read. "Children's artwork is ephemeral, especially when working with clay and natural materials. I document everything so I can track patterns, understand the evolution of her symbolic language, and the samples. I preserve small pieces because sometimes children want to revisit work they've destroyed or given away. Having fragments allows us to reconstruct and discuss past creations when she's ready." Rashid looked up from the notebook, feeling the familiar discomfort of having his suspicions prove both justified and completely wrong. Why at night? Why the secrecy? Because the moment documentation becomes visible to you, it becomes performance for you. Nadia would sense that shift immediately. She'd start creating for adult approval instead of personal expression, and we'd lose everything we've built. "You could have explained this to me. Would you have agreed to undocumented sessions? Would you have been comfortable not knowing exactly what we were doing and why?" Rashid closed the notebook, knowing she was right. His need to monitor and control would have made Amara's intuitive approach impossible. "There's something else," Amara continued, her voice taking on a different quality. "Something I think you need to understand about Nadia's progress." She gestured toward the house, where his daughter was now visible in the living room, arranging books on a low table with careful precision. "She's been asking about you." "About me?" "She wants to know why you watch her through the cameras instead of sitting with her. She's aware of the surveillance, Mr. Al-Zahra, and she's interpreting it as a sign that you're afraid of her." The words hit him like a physical blow. I'm not afraid of her. I'm trying to protect her." "From what?" "From disappointment. From pushing too hard and causing her to retreat again. From saying the wrong thing and undoing all the progress you've made." Amara nodded slowly. "And she interprets your protective distance as rejection. She thinks you're studying her like a problem to be solved, instead of spending time with her like a father who loves her." Rashid felt something crumble inside his chest. Everything he had done to help his daughter had been filtered through screens and cameras, mediated by technology and other people's expertise. When had he last simply sat with her without an agenda? "What does she want from me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "She wants you to make clay sculptures with her. She's been creating a space for 2 people at our work table for 3 days now, always glancing toward the house as if expecting someone to join us. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to help her the way you do. She doesn't need you to be a therapist or a teacher, Mr. Al-Zahra. She needs you to be her father, to be present without trying to fix anything." That afternoon, for the first time in over a month, Rashid joined them in the garden. He felt awkward and oversized, sitting on the small cushions Amara had arranged around the clay workspace, his business clothes incongruous among the earth and water containers. Nadia looked up when he approached, her eyes wide with something between surprise and hope. She didn't speak, but she carefully placed a small ball of clay in front of the empty space she had been maintaining at the table. "What should I make?" Rashid asked, addressing the question to both of them. "Whatever comes to your hands," Amara suggested. "Don't think about it." For the next hour, Rashid discovered muscles in his hands he had forgotten existed as he worked the clay between his fingers. His first attempts were clumsy, shapeless lumps that bore no resemblance to anything recognizable. But gradually, without conscious intention, his hands began forming something that resembled a building. Nadia watched his work intently, occasionally adding small details to her own creation. When Rashid's clay structure began to look like a miniature office building, complete with tiny windows pressed in with a pencil tip, she reached over and placed a small clay tree next to it. "Garden," she said quietly, the first word she had spoken directly to him in weeks. "For the building?" he asked. She nodded and continued working, creating an entire landscape around his corporate tower, flowing water features, walking paths, and small figures that looked like they were moving through a peaceful urban park. As they worked together in comfortable silence, Rashid began to understand what Amara had been trying to tell him. This wasn't therapy or education in any traditional sense. It was simply connection, 2 people sharing space and materials and time without the pressure of outcomes or objectives. But as the afternoon progressed, Rashid became aware of something that made him deeply uncomfortable. Several times, he caught Amara watching them with an intensity that went beyond casual supervision. She took notes, even during this supposedly spontaneous father-daughter time, and once he was certain he saw her discreetly photograph their joined clay landscape. "Tutor." Nadia went inside to wash her hands. Rashid confronted Amara directly. "You're still documenting everything, aren't you? Even this?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because this is the most important breakthrough yet. Nadia initiated collaborative play with you for the first time since her mother's death. The symbolic content of her additions to your sculpture suggests she's beginning to see you as someone who can provide nurturing rather than just structure." Rashid felt violated in a way he couldn't articulate. "I thought this was just family time." "It is. And it's also data about how she processes relationships, how she's healing, how she integrates new trust into her emotional framework. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Everything is research to you, isn't it? Even private moments between a father and daughter." Amara set down her pen and looked at him directly. "Do you want to know what my research is really documenting, Mr. Al-Zahra? Tell me. It's documenting the fact that Nadia is ready for more independence than you're allowing her. She's ready to leave the house, to interact with other children, to begin formal learning again. But she won't move forward until she feels secure that you won't disappear behind cameras and concerns the moment she takes that step." The weight of her words settled over him like heavy cloth. Everything he thought he was protecting Nadia from, she was ready to face. Everything he thought he was providing, she had already outgrown. What are you recommending? I'm recommending that you trust your daughter enough to let her show you how strong she's become. And I'm recommending that you trust yourself enough to be her father instead of her supervisor. That night, as Rashid reviewed the surveillance footage from their afternoon session, he watched himself seeing his daughter with new eyes. In the video, he could observe moments he had missed while living them. The way Nadia's posture relaxed when he sat down beside her, how her clay work became more elaborate and confident when he was participating rather than watching. But he could also see what Amara saw, a little girl who was ready to run but was waiting for permission from a father who had forgotten how to let go. The question was whether he was brave enough to turn off the cameras and trust what he couldn't monitor and control. The call came at 6:23 a.m. on a Thursday, jarring Rashid from the first peaceful sleep he'd had in weeks. The caller ID showed an international number with a Kenyan country code, and something about the early hour made his stomach clench with instinctive dread. Mr. Al-Zahra, this is Dr. Margaret Wanjiku from Kenyatta University in Nairobi. I'm calling. About Amara Kiptoo. Rashid sat up immediately, his mind snapping to full alertness. What about her? I understand she's working for your family. I felt I should contact you immediately because there's been a development in an ongoing investigation here that involves her directly. The words hit Rashid like ice water. What kind of investigation? Child endangerment charges were filed against her last month by the parents of a former student. They're claiming she conducted unauthorized psychological experiments on their daughter using unorthodox therapeutic methods. The case has gained significant attention in our education community. Rashid's grip tightened on the phone. Through his bedroom window, he could see the garden where Amara and Nadia would be working in just a few hours, creating their elaborate clay worlds and building trust, brick by careful brick. What specifically are they alleging? According to the complaint, Amara documented the child's private emotional expressions without parental consent, used unconventional materials and methods that put the child at physical risk, and created an unhealthy dependency relationship that caused severe distress when she left her position. Each accusation landed like a hammer blow against everything Rashid thought he understood about Amara's work with Nadia. The nighttime documentation, the clay sampling, the calculated risks, the intense bonding. Suddenly, everything took on a sinister cast. Is she dangerous? That's what we're trying to determine. The investigation is ongoing, but I felt you should know immediately given that she's working with another vulnerable child. Has she exhibited any of these behaviors with your daughter? Rashid found himself unable to speak. Every single behavior Dr. Wanjiku described matched exactly what he had observed through his surveillance system. Mr. Al-Zahra, are you there? Yes. Thank you for calling. I need to process this information. I would strongly recommend removing her from contact with your daughter until the investigation is complete. These are serious allegations, and child welfare must be the priority. After ending the call, Rashid sat in the pre-dawn darkness of his bedroom, his mind reeling. Everything he had witnessed over the past 6 weeks suddenly looked different, as if someone had adjusted the lighting in a photograph and revealed shadows he hadn't noticed before. Amara's reluctance to provide formal reports now seemed like concealment rather than professional philosophy. Her nighttime activities looked like evidence gathering for unknown purposes. Her insistence on working without oversight appeared calculated to hide inappropriate methods. Even Nadia's dramatic improvement could be interpreted as the result of manipulation rather than healing. But what disturbed him most was the possibility that his daughter was being prepared for the same devastating abandonment that had apparently traumatized the child in Kenya. By 7 a.m., Rashid had made his decision. He dressed quickly and positioned himself in the main hallway, waiting for Amara to arrive for the day's session. When she entered through the garden door with her usual quiet confidence, he was ready. "We need to talk now." Something in his tone must have alerted her to the seriousness of the situation, because she immediately set down her materials and followed him to his office without question. "I received a call this morning from Kenya," he began without preamble, "about an investigation into your methods." Amara's face went completely still, but she didn't look surprised. If anything, she seemed to have been expecting this moment. "Dr. Wanjiku called you," she said. "It wasn't a question. You knew this was coming?" "I knew it was possible. The parents of my former student have been persistent in their complaints." "Child endangerment, Amara. They're accusing you of child endangerment. They're accusing me of helping their daughter process severe trauma in ways that made them uncomfortable." Rashid slammed his hand on the desk, surprising himself with the violence of his reaction. "Don't minimize this. You documented my daughter without my full consent. You took risks with her safety. You created exactly the kind of dependency relationship they're describing. And has any of that harmed Nadia? How would I know? You've made it impossible for me to evaluate what you're actually doing." Amara was quiet for a long moment. Studying his face with that unreadable expression he had come to both trust and resent. "What do you want to know?" she asked finally. "Everything. The truth about what happened in Kenya. The truth about your methods. The truth about what you're really doing with my daughter." Amara moved to the window that overlooked the garden, where the morning light was beginning to illuminate the clay workspace they had shared for so many productive hours. "The child in Kenya was named Mercy," she began, her voice taking on the quality of someone recounting a story she'd told many times before. "She was 6 years old when I began working with her family. She had been severely abused by her stepfather and hadn't spoken in 8 months when her mother brought her to the clinic where I was volunteering." Rashid listened despite himself, torn between wanting to hear her defense and wanting to end this conversation immediately. Like Nadia, Mercy expressed herself through nonverbal means, drawing primarily, but also through play with water and sand. Her artwork was disturbing, dark themes, violent imagery, representations of trauma that no child should have to carry. "What did you do?" "I documented everything, every drawing, every play session, every tiny breakthrough. Not because I was conducting experiments, but because children who have been silenced need their voices preserved, even when those voices speak through art instead of words. Without the parents' consent, with the mother's full knowledge and approval, she was desperate for someone to understand what her daughter was trying to communicate. The stepfather, however, was not supportive of therapy that might lead to Mercy disclosing details of his abuse. Rashid felt a chill run down his spine. The stepfather filed the complaint, along with his wife, who was pressured into supporting his version of events. They claimed I was traumatizing Mercy by encouraging her to dwell on negative experiences instead of moving forward positively. They wanted her to stop drawing entirely and focus on normal childhood activities. What happened to Mercy? She was removed from therapy and enrolled in a traditional academic program. Within a month, she had regressed completely. The last I heard, she had been hospitalized for self-harm behaviors. The weight of this revelation settled over Rashid like a heavy blanket. If Amara was telling the truth, then the investigation wasn't about protecting children from her methods. It was about silencing her because her methods were too effective at revealing uncomfortable truths. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because you would have made the same assumptions you're making now. You would have seen the accusations instead of understanding the situation that created them." Rashid turned away from her, staring out at The garden where his daughter would soon be expecting both of them to join her for the day's session. Everything he thought he knew was shifting like sand beneath his feet. The dependency issue, he said. They claim you create unhealthy attachments. Children who have experienced profound loss often form intense connections with adults who prove they can be trusted not to abandon them. That's not pathological. It's natural healing. The question is whether the adult honors that trust or exploits it. And when you leave, what happens to them then? I don't leave until they're strong enough to handle the transition. And when I do leave, I make sure they understand it's not because they've done anything wrong or because they're not worthy of love. How can you be sure of that? Amara turned back to face him, and for the first time since he'd known her, he saw something vulnerable in her expression. Because I've been the child who was abandoned, Mr. Al-Zahra. I know exactly what that feels like, and I would never inflict it on another child. The confession hung in the air between them, adding new layers to everything Rashid thought he understood about this woman who had become so central to his daughter's world. "Tell me about your own childhood," he said quietly. "My parents died. In ethnic violence when I was 7. I was placed with relatives who didn't want me, then moved between foster situations until I aged out of the system. I learned early that adults promise things they don't deliver, that safety is temporary, and that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. Then why work with children? Why put yourself in positions where you have to leave them eventually? Because I also learned that one person who truly sees you, even for a short time, can change everything. I had a teacher, Mrs. Nakamura, who worked with me for only 6 months when I was 9. She never promised to stay forever, but she promised to believe in me while she was there. When she moved away, it didn't destroy me because she had taught me to believe in myself. Rashid sank into his desk chair, feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. Everything Amara was telling him made sense, but it also meant making a choice between trusting her completely or protecting his daughter from potential harm. "The family in Kenya," he said, "they genuinely believe you harmed their child. They believe that confronting trauma is more harmful than ignoring it. They believe that children should adapt to adult expectations rather than adults adapting to children's needs. They believe that normal behavior is more important than authentic healing. And you believe the opposite. I believe that children are stronger and wiser than we give them credit for. I believe that healing requires truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. And I believe that the adults who complain about my methods are usually the ones who have the most to hide." At that moment, as if summoned by the universe's sense of dramatic timing, a small knock came at the office door. Nadia's voice, clear and sweet, called out from the hallway. "Baba, Amara, are we making the big city today?" Rashid and Amara looked at each other across the desk, both realizing that they were at a crossroads that would determine not just the continuation of their professional relationship, but the trajectory of a little girl's recovery. "She's expecting us," Amara said softly. "I know." "What are you going to tell her?" Rashid stood up slowly, his decision crystallizing even as he spoke. "I'm going to tell her that sometimes adults need to have difficult conversations before they can play. And then I'm going to ask you to show me exactly what you've been documenting about my daughter's progress. Everything, everything. The photographs, the samples, the analysis, all of it. If you want me to trust you with her healing, then you need to trust me with your methods." Amara nodded once, and for the first time since the phone call, Rashid saw something like relief in her expression. "And after you've seen everything, after I've seen everything, I'll decide whether you stay or go." Another knock, more insistent this time. "Baba, is everything okay?" "We're coming, little one," Rashid called out, then looked back at Amara. "Show me what you see when you look at my daughter. Show me what I've been missing." as they walked toward the door to join Nadia. Rashid realized that the next few hours would either restore his faith in the woman who had given his daughter back her voice, or shatter his trust so completely that he would never again be able to believe in healing that couldn't be measured and controlled. The surveillance cameras would capture it all. But for once, Rashid wondered if the most important truths were the ones that could only be seen through a parent's eyes, not a security monitor's lens. What Rashid discovered in Amara's private documentation would forever change how he understood not just his daughter's healing journey, but the depth of trauma that children can carry and the extraordinary ways they find to survive it. Amara led him to her guest suite, where she had converted the second bedroom into what could only be described as a research sanctuary. The walls were covered with carefully organized photographs, detailed timelines, and analysis charts that looked more like the work of a forensic psychologist than a simple tutor. "This is everything," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. 6 weeks of documentation. The scope of her work was staggering. Hundreds of photographs showed Nadia's clay sculptures from every angle, with detailed notes about the time of creation, the child's emotional state, and the symbolic elements present in each piece. But what made Rashid's breath catch was the sophisticated analysis that accompanied each image. Day 8. N created her first human figure, a woman with arms that extend far beyond normal proportion, as if trying to encompass more space than physically possible. Significantly, the figure has no face, suggesting connection to love without identity, likely representation of maternal presence felt but not visually remembered. Day 15. Recurring architectural theme. Buildings with multiple entrances but no visible exits. When asked about these structures, N said they were safe houses where people come when the world gets too loud, processing sensory overwhelm through environmental control metaphors. Day 23. Breakthrough in trauma processing. N created a series of small figures in various states of breaking apart and reforming. She called them hurt dolls, learning to be whole again, first explicit acknowledgement of her own healing process. Rashid moved from display to display, seeing his daughter's inner world mapped out with scientific precision and artistic sensitivity. Each photograph captured not just the physical appearance of her creations, but somehow conveyed the emotional intensity with which she had made them. "How do you know what it all means?" he asked, pausing at a particularly complex analysis of a sculpture that looked like a tree with human faces embedded in its trunk. "I don't know," Amara replied. "I observe patterns, make educated guesses, test theories by offering new materials or experiences and watching how she responds. But the meanings come from her, not from me. These faces in the tree, her family. She's been working through the concept that people we love become part of us even after they're gone. The tree grows around them, but they remain essential to its structure." Rashid stared at the photograph, remembering the day Nadia had made this piece. He had watched through the security cameras, seeing only a child playing with clay. He had missed the profound, emotional work happening right in front of him, but it was the next section of Amara's documentation that truly stunned him. She had created a detailed timeline of Nadia's behavioral patterns, tracking not just her progress in therapy sessions, but her interactions with the household staff, her sleep patterns, her eating habits, and most revealing of all, her responses to his presence. "You've been studying me too," he said, reading notes about his own behavior patterns. Day 12. N becomes more animated when father is physically present, but less expressive when she knows he's monitoring remotely, suggests awareness of surveillance, creates performance anxiety rather than comfort. Day 18. Father joined clay session for first time. N's work immediately became more collaborative, less introspective. She's eager for his engagement but uncertain how to ask for it directly. Day 25. N asked why Baba watches from far away, explained that some people show love by watching carefully to make sure others are safe. She responded, "But watching is not the same as being together." Profound insight into difference between supervision and connection. Rashid felt heat creep up his neck as he read analysis after analysis of his own parenting approach. Every avoidance, every well-intentioned mistake, every moment he had chosen monitoring over engagement was documented with the same careful attention Amara gave to Nadia's artwork. "You think I'm a terrible father," he said quietly. "I think you're a grieving husband who learned to love through providing and protecting, and now you're trying to learn how to love through presence and play. That's not terrible, it's human, but you've been documenting my failures. I've been documenting your growth. Look at this." She showed him a series of photographs from their recent joint sessions, with notes that read like a celebration rather than a clinical assessment. Day 28. Father-daughter collaborative sculpture shows dramatic improvement in his comfort with unstructured play. N guided him through process of building a dream house, without him attempting to impose adult logic or efficiency. Breakthrough. In parental presence. Day 30, F allowed N to teach him clay techniques, reversing traditional power dynamic. N demonstrated remarkable patience and encouragement when his attempts were clumsy. Role reversal indicates increasing security in relationship. Day 35. F spent full hour without checking phone or looking toward house. N mentioned this to kitchen staff later. "Baba stayed with me the whole time." Suggests her primary need was simply undivided attention. As Rashid read through weeks of observations about both him and Nadia, he began to understand that Amara hadn't just been treating his daughter, she had been treating their entire family system, carefully documenting how each change in one person affected the others. "This is extraordinary work," he said finally, "but it's also far beyond what I hired you to do." "Is it? You hired me to help your daughter heal. This is what healing actually looks like, not just individual therapy, but understanding and adjusting the entire environment that shapes a child's sense of safety and connection." Rashid moved to another wall where Amara had displayed what appeared to be comparison charts. What are these? Before and after analysis. Nadia's symbolic representations from her first week compared to her most recent work. The difference was startling. Early sculptures were predominantly dark, closed forms, caves, shells, buildings with no windows. Recent work showed increasing openness, movement, and complexity. Figures with outstretched arms, structures with multiple levels connected by bridges, landscapes that suggested journey and growth rather than hiding and protection. "She's literally sculpting her own recovery," Amara explained. Each piece shows her expanding capacity for hope, connection, and trust. And this, Rashid pointed to a separate section labeled Risk Assessment. Documentation of every physically challenging activity we've undertaken, with analysis of safety protocols and Nadia's demonstrated competencies. The fountain incident you were concerned about. It was the culmination of 3 weeks of gradually increasing water-based activities that built both her confidence and her skills. Rashid studied the detailed progression, from touching water with fingertips to wading in shallow containers, to leaning over flowing streams, finally to safely navigating the fountain's edge. What had seemed like reckless risk-taking was actually carefully scaffolded skill building. You've been planning her development like a construction project, like a healing journey that requires both emotional and physical milestones. She needed to prove to herself that she could handle challenging situations without adult rescue. That confidence transfers to emotional resilience. But it was the final section of Amara's documentation that brought Rashid to his knees, literally. He sank into a chair as he read through pages titled Future Recommendations. The analysis was devastating in its clarity. Amara had identified specific areas where Nadia was ready for independence, detailed suggestions for transitioning her back to formal education, and a timeline for gradually reducing therapeutic support. But most importantly, she had outlined the exact ways Rashid's continued overprotection might sabotage his daughter's progress. "She's ready to leave the house regularly," he read aloud, "ready for structured learning environments, ready for peer interaction, ready for overnight stays away from home." "More than ready," Amara confirmed. "She's been ready for 2 weeks, but she won't take those steps until she's confident you won't panic and retreat back into surveillance mode." "You're recommending that I stop monitoring her. I'm recommending that you trust what you've seen with your own eyes during our sessions together. She's not fragile anymore, Mr. Al-Zahra. She's strong, resilient, and eager to engage with the world, but she needs her father to believe in that strength." Rashid continued reading, his heart pounding as he absorbed recommendation after recommendation that would require him to fundamentally change how he approached parenting. Enroll her in regular school within 1 month. Arrange playdates with children her age. Encourage independent exploration of the city with appropriate supervision. Reduce therapeutic intervention to weekly check-ins within 6 weeks. You're essentially recommending that you work yourself out of a job. I'm recommending that Nadia graduate from therapy into normal childhood. That was always the goal. And the Kenya investigation? What happens when they discover you're implementing the same methods here that got you in trouble there? Amara was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Rashid understand he was hearing something she had never said aloud before. "The investigation will find exactly what they found here, detailed documentation of a child's remarkable recovery, achieved through methods that prioritize the child's actual needs over adult comfort. If that's considered child endangerment, then every child who has been helped by unconventional therapy is evidence of my crimes. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, but not of losing my reputation or facing legal consequences. I'm terrified of living in a world where helping children heal is considered dangerous, where adults' need to control and understand is more important than children's need to be seen and heard." Rashid looked around the room one more time, taking in the full scope of what Amara had accomplished. 6 weeks of documentation that read like a love letter to his daughter's courage, a scientific study of resilience, and a roadmap for a healing he had never imagined possible. Why show me all this now? You could have kept it private until you left. Because you're about to face the same choice the parents in Kenya faced. You can trust what you've witnessed and allow Nadia to continue growing, or you can let fear convince you that protecting her from challenge is the same as protecting her from harm. And if I choose wrong, then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering who your daughter might have become if you had been brave enough to let her try. Outside the window, they could see Nadia in the garden, no longer working with clay, but reading a book under the date palm tree. The first time she had voluntarily engaged with written words since her mother's death. "She's ready," Amara said, simply. "The question is whether you are." Rashid stood up slowly, his mind reeling with everything he had learned. In 6 weeks, Amara had not only healed his daughter, but had forced him to confront every assumption he held about strength, safety, and love. Now he had to decide whether to trust in that healing enough to let it continue growing, or whether to choose the familiar comfort of control over the uncertain promise of freedom. The documentation laid out before him told a story of extraordinary recovery, but it also demanded an extraordinary leap of faith from a man who had built his empire on certainty and measurable outcomes. As he looked at his daughter reading peacefully in the garden, Rashid realized that the most important surveillance had never been the cameras monitoring her activities. It had been learning to see her through the eyes of someone who believed in her strength rather than feared for her fragility. The decision to test Nadia's readiness for independence came sooner than anyone expected, and in a way that would challenge every assumption Rashid held about his daughter's capabilities. It was a Friday morning when Amara made her proposal, standing in the garden while Nadia worked on what she called her freedom sculpture, an intricate clay structure featuring small figures climbing staircases that spiraled upward toward open sky. "There's an exhibition at the Museum of Islamic Art tomorrow," Amara said casually, watching Nadia's careful work. "Children's art from around the world, including some pieces from refugee communities. I think Nadia would find it fascinating." Rashid, who had been attempting to help with the sculpture but mostly just watching his daughter's skilled hands shape the clay, looked up sharply. "An exhibition? A public space? Other families? Other children? Exactly the kind of environment she needs to practice her social skills in. She's never, since her mother died, she hasn't been in public spaces like that, which is exactly why she needs to try. In my documentation, I've noted 17 separate indicators that she's ready for this kind of exposure. Her anxiety levels have decreased dramatically. Her communication skills have expanded beyond our private sessions, and most importantly, she's expressing curiosity about the outside world." As if summoned by their conversation, Nadia looked up from her work. "What's an exhibition, Amara? It's like a big room full of art where people go to see beautiful things and think new thoughts. Some of the art is made by children just like you." Nadia's eyes widened with genuine interest. "Children like me? Some who have experienced difficult things, yes. Children who use art to tell stories about their feelings, just like you do." Rashid felt his chest tighten. The idea of taking Nadia into a crowded museum, surrounded by strangers and unpredictable stimuli, triggered every protective instinct he had developed over the past year. "I don't think she's ready for that level of exposure." "Baba," Nadia said softly, setting down her clay tools. "I want to see the art." The simple statement hit Rashid like a physical blow. It was the first time in almost a year that his daughter had directly expressed a desire to go somewhere outside their protected environment. It would be very crowded, Habibti, lots of people, lots of noise, but Amara would be there. "And you, of course," Amara interjected before Rashid could voice his concerns. "We would all go together, and if you felt overwhelmed at any point, we could leave immediately." Rashid looked between his daughter's hopeful face and Amara's calm confidence, feeling trapped between his instinct to protect and his growing understanding that protection might sometimes require risk. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Amara said. "But Nadia, what do you think? How does the idea make you feel?" Nadia was quiet for a long moment, her hands returning to the clay as she considered the question. "Scared," she said finally, "but also excited. Like the feeling when you're going to jump in the swimming pool, but you're not sure if the water will be cold." The metaphor was so perfectly articulated that Rashid realized his daughter's capacity for self-reflection had grown far beyond what he had been giving her credit for. That evening, after Nadia had gone to bed, Rashid found himself in his office, reviewing surveillance footage from the day, but for the first time he wasn't looking for problems. Instead, he was looking for evidence of the readiness Amara claimed to see. The cameras showed a child who moved through the house with increasing confidence, who initiated conversations with the staff, who had reorganized her playroom to include books and art supplies rather than just comfort objects. When the gardener had asked for her help selecting flowers for the weekly arrangements, she had engaged enthusiastically, demonstrating knowledge about color combinations and seasonal blooms that she must have absorbed from watching him work. Most telling of all, the footage showed Nadia standing at the main gate that afternoon, not trying to leave, but simply observing the street beyond with obvious curiosity rather than fear. The next morning, Rashid made his decision. "We'll go to the exhibition," he announced over breakfast, "but we'll have an exit strategy, and at the first sign that you're overwhelmed, we leave immediately." Nadia's smile was radiant. "Really, Baba? We can really go?" "Really. But you have to promise to tell us if you need a break." "I promise." Amara nodded approvingly. "I've already researched the museum's layout. There are quiet spaces we can retreat to if needed, and Saturday mornings tend to be less crowded than afternoons." The drive to the Museum of Islamic Art was the longest car journey Nadia had taken since her mother's funeral, and Rashid found himself monitoring her reactions obsessively through the rear-view mirror. But instead of anxiety, he saw excitement. She pressed her face to the window, asking questions about the buildings they passed, commenting on the architecture, pointing out details in the cityscape that showed she had been absorbing far more about the world beyond their estate than he had realized. "Look, Baba, that building has the same kind of arches as our fountain." "You're right, Habibti. Many buildings in Qatar use traditional Islamic architectural elements. Can we drive past it again sometime? I want to draw it." Rashid met Amara's eyes in the rear-view mirror, seeing her quiet satisfaction at this evidence of Nadia's expanding interests. The museum itself was a test of everything they had worked toward over the past 6 weeks. The moment they entered the soaring atrium, with its geometric patterns and play of light and shadow, Nadia stopped walking and simply stared upward in wonder. "It's like being inside a kaleidoscope," she whispered. Other families moved around them, parents with children of various ages, elderly couples studying guidebooks, groups of tourists speaking multiple languages, the exact kind of crowded, unpredictable environment that Rashid had been avoiding for months. But Nadia didn't retreat or cling to him. Instead, she moved forward purposefully, drawn by the promise of art that awaited in the exhibition halls. The children's exhibition was held in a smaller gallery space, with artwork displayed at child-friendly heights and interactive stations, where young visitors could try techniques demonstrated in the displayed pieces. Nadia approached each piece with intense focus, reading the accompanying descriptions aloud and asking sophisticated questions about the artist's techniques and motivations. "This boy from Syria made his painting with sand and glue," she observed, studying a textured landscape. "He said he wanted people to feel what his homeland felt like under their fingers." "What do you think about that approach?" Amara asked. "I think he's very smart. Sometimes touch tells stories that eyes can't see." It was while they were examining a series of clay sculptures created by children in a refugee camp, work that bore striking similarities to Nadia's own creations, that the moment Rashid had been dreading finally arrived. A group of school children, roughly Nadia's age, entered the gallery with their teacher. Their excited chatter and rapid movement through the space created exactly the kind of sensory chaos that had previously sent Nadia into shutdown mode. Rashid tensed, ready to guide his daughter toward the quiet alcove Amara had identified as their retreat space. But Nadia surprised him. Instead of withdrawing, she moved closer to one of the display cases, where a girl about her own age was studying a clay figure that looked remarkably similar to the hurt dolls Nadia had been creating. "That looks like one of mine," Nadia said quietly, addressing the other girl directly. The girl looked up, curious rather than alarmed by the unexpected comment. "You make sculptures too?" "Yes. With clay and water and sometimes flowers." "I tried clay once, But mine looked like lumpy pancakes, the girl laughed. How do you make them look like actual people? And suddenly, Nadia was teaching, explaining her techniques with the same patience Amara had shown her, demonstrating with her hands how to build forms from the inside out, how to use tools to create texture and expression. The other girl listened intently, asking follow-up questions that showed genuine interest. Soon, a small group of children had gathered around Nadia, all eager to learn about clay sculpting from someone who clearly knew what she was talking about. Rashid watched in amazement as his daughter, the child who had been unable to speak to therapists or tolerate the presence of strangers, became an enthusiastic teacher, sharing her knowledge and passion with peers who appreciated her expertise. "She's in her element," Amara murmured beside him. "This is what I meant about her being ready for peer interaction. She has so much to offer other children." "How did you know this would happen?" "I didn't know this specifically would happen, but I knew she had developed confidence in her abilities and knowledge to share. When children feel secure in what they know, they naturally want to teach others." The informal art lesson continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Nadia demonstrating techniques, answering questions, and even collaborating with some of the other children on sketches of sculptures they might try at home. When the school group was called to move on to the next gallery, several children asked for Nadia's contact information so they could show her their own artwork attempts. "I don't have a phone," Nadia said matter-of-factly, "but maybe Baba could help us figure out how to share pictures." Rashid found himself promising to look into setting up some kind of art-sharing arrangement, still stunned by the transformation he had witnessed. On the drive home, Nadia chatted excitedly about everything she had seen and learned, already making plans for new sculpture techniques she wanted to try. "Amara, can we make clay that changes colors like that one painting? And can we try using different kinds of stones for texture? And do you think other children would want to come see our garden workspace?" "I think other children would love to see your workspace," Amara replied. "And I think you would be an excellent teacher for them." "Really? You think I could teach art?" "I think you could teach many things. You have knowledge and patience and creativity. Those are the most important qualities a teacher needs." That evening, as Rashid tucked Nadia into bed, she looked up at him with serious eyes. "Baba, today was the best day I've had since Mama died." The statement was delivered without sadness or dramatic emphasis, simply as a factual observation from a child who was learning to measure her life in moments of joy rather than absence. "I'm so glad, Habibti. You were very brave today." "I wasn't brave. I was just myself. But with other people around. That's exactly what brave means." As he kissed her goodnight and turned off the lights, Rashid realized that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. The child he had been protecting so carefully was stronger than he had ever imagined, and the strength hadn't come from his protection, but from learning to trust herself. Later that night, he found Amara in the garden, sitting by the fountain where so much of their work had taken place. "You were right," he said simply, "about everything. Today went well. Today was a revelation. She's not the fragile child I thought I was protecting. She's confident, knowledgeable, socially capable." "When did that happen?" "It's been happening. Gradually for weeks. You've been so focused on preventing problems that you missed the solutions developing right in front of you." Rashid sat down beside her on the stone bench, looking out at the garden, where his daughter had rediscovered her voice and her strength. "The Kenya investigation," he said. "What's going to happen?" "I don't know. But after today, I'm not afraid of defending my methods. Any child who can go from selective mutism to teaching other children in 6 weeks is proof that unconventional approaches sometimes achieve what traditional therapy cannot. And if they try to stop you from working with other children, then I'll find other ways to help." The work itself is more important than my reputation or career." Rashid was quiet for a long moment, processing everything that had changed in their lives over the past weeks. "I want to do something," he said finally. "Something to support what you're doing, not just with Nadia, but with other children who need this kind of help." "What do you mean?" "I mean funding, resources, a proper facility where you can work with children without having to worry about investigations or institutional politics." Amara turned to look at him directly. "You're talking about a significant commitment." "I'm talking about investing in something that works. Today proved that your methods don't just help children survive trauma, they help them thrive beyond it." As they sat together in the garden, where so much healing had taken place, Rashid realized that the surveillance cameras had captured something far more valuable than security footage. They had documented the transformation of a family learning to see strength where they had expected fragility, growth where they had feared damage, and hope where they had prepared for limitation. The real revelation wasn't what Amara had been hiding, but what she had been revealing all along: that children are far more resilient and capable than the adults who love them often dare to believe. 3 months after the museum exhibition, the call that would vindicate everything came from an unexpected source. Rashid was in his office reviewing architectural plans for the therapeutic learning center he was funding when his assistant announced that Dr. Margaret Wanjiku was on the line. The same Dr. Wanjiku whose investigation had nearly torn apart everything Amara had built with Nadia. "Mr. Al-Zahra," her voice was different this time, respectful, almost apologetic. "I'm calling with an update about the investigation into Ms. Kiptu's methods." Rashid straightened in his chair, his heart rate quickening despite months of confidence. "In Amara's work, what kind of update?" "The case has been officially closed, all charges have been dropped, and the university has issued a formal apology." "What happened?" "The child involved, Mercy, was interviewed by independent child psychologists. She provided testimony that completely contradicted her parents' claims. It turns out she had been progressing remarkably under Ms. Kiptu's care, but was silenced. When her stepfather realized, her art was beginning to depict his abuse. Rashid felt a wave of vindication mixed with rage. Everything Amara had suggested about the true motivation behind the investigation had been proven correct. "The stepfather has been arrested," Dr. Wanjiku continued, "and Mercy is back in therapy, asking specifically for someone who uses the Clay Lady's methods. We're actually hoping Ms. Kiptu might consider returning to Kenya to train other therapists." "I'll discuss it with her," Rashid said, though he suspected he already knew Amara's answer. "There's something else, Mr. Al-Zahra. We've been receiving inquiries from families around the world who heard about Ms. Kiptu's work through various channels. There seems to be significant demand for the therapeutic approach she's developed." After ending the call, Rashid walked through his house toward the sounds of laughter coming from the garden. What he found there would have been impossible to imagine 8 months earlier. Nadia was leading a small group of children from her new school through the clay workspace, demonstrating techniques with the confidence of a master artist. The Nadia's Garden Arts program had become so popular that they had to limit enrollment and create a waiting list. "Remember, the clay has to feel like your emotions before you can shape it into your story," she was saying to a shy boy who reminded Rashid painfully of how his own daughter had once hidden from the world. "If you're sad, let it be soft and heavy. If you're angry, squeeze it tight first." Amara supervised from nearby, but her role had evolved from primary therapist to mentor and program coordinator. She was training a team of educators in what they now called expressive therapeutic arts, methods that had proven effective not just with traumatized children, but with any child struggling to find their voice. "How did the call go?" she asked, as Rashid joined her on the observation bench they had installed to accommodate the growing number of parents who wanted to watch their children's sessions. Complete vindication. The investigation is closed, charges dropped, and they want you to come train other therapists." Amara smiled, but her attention remained focused on the children. "And what did you tell them?" "That I'd discuss it with my business partner. It had taken months to finalize the legal structure, but the Al-Zahra Foundation for Therapeutic Arts was now officially operational, with Amara as Director of Methods and Research. Their pilot program in Qatar had attracted attention from educators, child psychologists, and trauma specialists from around the world. "The facility construction is ahead of schedule," Rashid continued. "We'll be able to accommodate residential programs within 6 months. And the university partnerships? 3 confirmed so far. They want to study our methods, document our outcomes, and replicate our programs. Everything you've been doing intuitively is going to become formal therapeutic protocol." Amara nodded, but he could see she was processing something beyond the logistical updates. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how we measure success," she said, watching as Nadia helped the shy boy create his first recognizable sculpture, a small bird with wings spread wide. "8 months ago, your daughter couldn't speak to strangers. Today, she's teaching them to transform their pain into art. The transformation has been remarkable. But it's not just about her individual healing anymore. Look around." Rashid followed her gaze, taking in the full scope of what had grown from those first tentative clay sessions. Parents sat in conversation, sharing experiences and strategies they had learned from watching their children's progress. Siblings who had initially felt left out were now enrolled in their own creative programs. Even the household staff had begun incorporating elements of Amara's approach into their daily interactions with children. "You've created a community," he realized. "We've created a community. This only works because you were willing to transform, from supervisor to participant, from controller to collaborator." At that moment, Nadia approached them with her student group, trailing behind. "Baba, Amara, can you come see what Ahmed made? It's about missing his grandmother, but also about how her stories live inside him now." The sculpture the formerly shy boy had created was extraordinary, a small figure with arms full of books, surrounded by floating symbols that somehow conveyed both loss and continuation. "Tell them what you told me about the books," Nadia encouraged. Ahmed, who had barely spoken during his first session, now explained his artwork with growing confidence. "My grandmother used to tell me stories every night. When she died, I thought the stories died too. But when I made this, I realized they're still here." He pointed to his chest. "The books represent how her voice lives in my memory." "That's profound insight," Amara said gently. "How does it feel to understand that about yourself?" "It feels like being sad and happy at the same time, but it's okay to feel both." Rashid watched this exchange with amazement that still felt fresh, after months of witnessing such breakthroughs. Children who arrived withdrawn and struggling consistently discovered not just healing, but wisdom that seemed beyond their years. As the afternoon session concluded and parents arrived to collect their children, Rashid found himself reflecting on the surveillance footage that had started it all. His security system still recorded everything, but now the cameras captured joy instead of isolation, growth instead of regression, connection instead of withdrawal. That evening, as had become their tradition, the 3 of them sat together in the garden reviewing the day's progress. But tonight felt different, more like a celebration than a debriefing. "I have news," Nadia announced, with the solemnity she reserved for important declarations. "Mrs. Hassan asked if I want to help train the new children's program at the community center. She said I have natural teaching abilities." "And what did you tell her?" Rashid asked. "I said yes, but only if Amara thinks I'm ready for that much responsibility." Amara smiled. I think you've been ready for weeks. The question is whether you feel ready. I feel excited and nervous, but excited is bigger than nervous, so I think that means yes. The simple wisdom of her statement, that courage meant feeling fear but choosing action anyway, struck Rashid as a perfect summation of everything their family had learned over the past year. "There's something I want to show you both," he said, retrieving a folder from his briefcase. "The architectural plans for the new facility include something special." He spread out the detailed drawings, pointing to a central courtyard designed around flowing water features and sculptural spaces. "The Layla Memorial Garden," he explained, his voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. "A place where children can connect with nature while they work through their healing journey." Nadia studied the plans carefully, her finger tracing the pathways and water features. "Mama would love this," she said simply. "She always said art and nature were the best teachers." "I think she would be proud of everything you've accomplished," Amara added. "You've honored her memory by becoming someone who helps others find their voices. And you, Baba, are you proud of what we've built?" Connected to her purpose, and felt his chest fill with a pride so profound it took his breath away. "Habibti, I am proud beyond anything I ever imagined possible. Not just of what you've overcome, but of who you've chosen to become." As they sat, together under the stars, surrounded by the garden where so much healing had taken place, Rashid realized that the surveillance cameras had ultimately captured the most important truth of all, that healing happens not when we watch from a distance, but when we choose to step into the messiness and beauty of real connection. The footage from those early days showed a broken family learning to see strength where they had expected fragility, wisdom where they had feared damage, and hope where they had prepared for limitation. But the real legacy wasn't captured by any camera. It was written in the confidence of children who had learned to transform their pain into art, in the trust between adults who had chosen collaboration over control, and in the understanding that the most profound healing happens when we stop trying to fix each other and start learning to see each other clearly. 6 months later, the Al-Zahra Foundation's first international conference on expressive therapeutic arts would host over 300 participants from 47 countries. Nadia would deliver the opening address, speaking about the difference between being helped and being seen, between being protected and being trusted. Amara would present research showing that children in their programs demonstrated not just recovery from trauma, but increased creativity, emotional intelligence, and social leadership skills compared to traditional therapy approaches. And Rashid would announce the establishment of satellite programs in refugee camps, underserved communities, and conflict zones around the world, places where children needed someone to believe in their strength rather than focus on their wounds. But perhaps the most important moment would come during the conference's final session, when a small girl from Syria would present a clay sculpture to Nadia, a figure of a woman with arms that stretched around the whole world, labeled simply "Teachers Who See." That sculpture would join hundreds of others in the Foundation's permanent collection, each one testament to the profound truth that had started it all. That children are not problems to be solved, but human beings waiting for someone brave enough to meet them exactly where they are. The surveillance had revealed everything, just as the title promised. But what it revealed wasn't secrets or hidden dangers. It was the extraordinary capacity for healing that emerges when trust replaces fear, when presence replaces protection, and when we choose to see strength instead of looking for weaknesses. In the end, the cameras had captured the most beautiful truth of all, that love, real love, means believing in someone's light even when they can't see it themselves, and staying close enough to witness the moment when they finally learn to shine. Up next, You've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.